Since computer games first appeared in the 1970s, they've grown into a $16 billion industry worldwide. But though that sounds massive, games are still not a mass market to match the music and movie industries. Like Hollywood movies, games currently have only a handful of genres. Most of them are short on story, but big on action.
The games that I generally like to play are the driving games. I think it's the speed, I think it's being able to do something that you can't generally do when you're on the road, when you're driving for real.
I like playing what are called first-person shoot-'em-ups, where you either run around an underground maze or an outdoor landscape, gun in hand, blazing away at monsters, aliens, or other human beings.
I like playing the football games.
I have all these sort of boyhood wartime fantasies, but the beauty of these games is you can go and play them and relieve your stress without anyone getting hurt.
Chested down, good control. Yes! The keeper beaten there. Great finish.
In the last few years, the adrenaline-pumping action has been souped up with ultra-realistic graphics generated by new games consoles like the Dreamcast and PlayStation.
Graphic realism is fundamental to the pleasure of playing a computer game.
Graphics have changed so much. I mean, probably about 3 years ago, they were just really blocky and just didn't move much or animate that much. And now the consoles are just amazing.
Though graphic realism is important, there's more to creating games with mass appeal.
The problem isn't just we need more powerful computers. We also need to know what to do with those computers in order to make the characters that appear in the games more lifelike or more human-like or more intelligent.
For a start, objects in computer games don't always behave as they would in the real world.
It's hard to tell the difference sometimes between what you see on the screen and a television picture. But when things look real but don't move in the right way, it jars.
People not walking through walls is important. People not banging into each other in a totally... I mean, people don't bang into each other on the street, so if all your players in a computer game or in a game of football bash into each other consistently, then it does detract from the realism of the game.
Not only does improbable action undermine the appeal of games, they're also marred by a total absence of plausible human or even animal characters.
It's all very well us making games that look almost like movies nowadays, but what they have to be filled with is characters that are believable, and that's our big problem at the moment. It's rather like when the movie industry was in the black and white phase and then when it first went to colour, you know, they got things wrong, and we need to create characters in games that look like and behave like and act like real human beings. Characters that maybe even eventually make you laugh and cry, like characters that you have in a movie.
I've never cried over a game.
But she might. With their eyes firmly fixed on making games appeal to everyone, computer scientists at 2 British companies are putting all their efforts into injecting behavioural reality into virtual reality. Peter Molyneux's company, Lionhead Studios, is focusing on putting emotion into games. While at Math Engine, a 40-strong team of physicists and mathematicians is thinking very hard about how to put convincing movement into games.
One way people do that is to animate nice motion, nice behaviour of objects. Football game is a typical example. You'll get quite a lot of variation in the animations. So a footballer can kick the ball in 10 different ways, 20 different ways, but that's it. And the game jumps between different animations.
After you've played the game 10 times, you'll look at it and think, well, hang on, I've seen that happen before.
Yes! Yes!
But with physics, you know, your 2 footballers can come together and collide, and they will react depending on that actual instance.
Physics is the key to making everything in the game world move like the real world. Whether it's race cars, rope bridges, more common in games than in life, or water, they should comply with the same fundamental laws of physics that keep Tim upright on his unicycle.
Quite simple physics, Newtonian physics. We don't bother with any relativity or quantum mechanics. The laws of Newtonian physics are quite simple, but they have huge amounts of repercussions. From a very simple set of rules, all sorts of behaviour arises.
Physics does all sorts of things for gameplay, depending on what sort of game you're playing. If you're playing a driving game, it'll make the car feel more realistic. If you're playing a war game of some sort, we might be able to make the smoke look better, and it just gives a richness and a depth to the environment.
As well as the environment and inanimate objects, physics affects the way human bodies move. People are often animated in games using motion capture techniques, but this limits the gameplay.
When you're not interacting with bodies, they tend to look all right. So basically, because they can either use what's called motion capture, or an animator can spend a lot of time making the motion look good. So when there's no interaction, it can look very good. It's when you interact that you really see the flaws of the traditional methods for animating humans. So bringing physical models in greatly improves how you can interact with the character in the game. What we tend to focus on at the moment is the skeletal structure beneath the skin, and some sorts of muscle models which will, if you like, sort of bend and stretch the joints of the skeleton. Using the same physics as the rope bridge, but the rope bridge, the joints are very simple. They just rotate around.
Once physics is programmed in, bodies aren't doomed to repeat pre-scripted animated moves. They fall differently, as well as with painful realism every time.
The most easiest example I can think of, which is not so PC if you like, but it's fighting games. At the moment, if you're in a battle with another character in a game, once again it's pre-scripted. When you have a pre-scripted punch, and especially when the character is hit, they fall in a pre-scripted way. So the next generation of fighting games, how hard you hit, the character will fall in a completely unscripted way.
Once the laws of physics are introduced, it's possible to calculate the relative motion of hundreds of objects, like shrapnel from an explosion, a popular request for games.
One of the problems with the way a lot of explosions are done today is they'll throw a few objects out of the middle, and they'll spin and they'll land and they'll just disappear. They might bounce once, the bounce won't be very realistic, and then the object just fades away. But with proper physics, we'd like to be able to have those objects land and settle, shatter. How do you add physics to computer games? You get out your university textbooks and you work out how to get the computer to solve Newton's equations.
It's a classical level physics, so the stuff you do at school with balls rolling down planes, restitution when you drop a ball, how much energy it loses, Newton's laws, principles of conservation of energy and momentum. Newton's laws in themselves are very simple, but even if I have just 3 objects coming together, then it's intractable to solve that problem analytically, and you must resort to computer simulation.
In all computer games, objects start as mesh outlines. The mesh is then rendered with polygons and shaded. To move the object around the game, MathEngine then calculates its physical properties.
If you wanted to simulate it moving, you'd have to tell it how heavy it was. You'd have to tell it where the mass was distributed. And then if you wanted to slide it over the table, you'd have to tell it how rough the bottom of the teapot was and how rough the table was. You'd have to tell it what the friction between the two are. If you wanted to drop it and let it bounce, you'd have to tell it what the restitution was, how bouncy it is. And that'd be different depending on whether the teapot was bouncing on the table or on the floor. If you wanted to break the teapot, you'd have to understand how fast cracks would propagate through the ceramic.
Teapots don't feature prominently in games, but mathematicians like a challenge.
When people were learning to do complicated graphics on computers, a teapot was a nice, complicated shape. So historically, it's a very useful thing to be able to display.
When the physical properties of an object have been calculated and Newton's laws applied, the team calculate the location of the moving object in every frame of the game. Films display a mere 24 frames a second, But computer games display up to 60 frames a second, so that means making up to 60 calculations a second.
Computer games need to go at 50 or 60 frames a second in order to animate realistically and not psychologically to see a lag. We have to do the physical calculations equally 50, 60 times a second in order to get the realism out of it.
Math Engine is not the only company to create simulations of physics, but it is one of the few doing it in real time.
The traditional way of doing it, if you're doing film graphics or if you're doing engineering graphics, is to actually pre-render it, pre-calculate it. So you can take maybe a minute calculating the physics that happens in a fraction of a second.
They're prepared to wait days or weeks for the results to come out, whereas here you want it to be interactive.
Math Engine don't design games themselves. Their physics software is integrated into games by other companies. It's also used in other types of software, including engineering simulations, like this tree logger, which was designed to teach people to drive without the risk of crashing a multi-million-pound machine.
As computing power increases, even with modern consoles, we can actually put these big simulations on everyday machines. And perhaps one day we'll have everyone that learns to drive learning on a Math Engine simulator.
You can't pass your driving test on a Math Engine simulation yet, but their work is bringing the prospect of games never playing the same way twice closer.
Be able to move beyond what the original designer expected. You can't escape from the size of a game that has been designed in a traditional game. You have to basically do moves that are allowed. This will completely open up the kind of punches you can throw and how you're going to fall. So there'll be just larger space to play in.
There's a randomness and an unpredictability.
And they're not restricted to the situations that the programmer originally conceived.
Which means that you're not quite sure what's going to happen.
If creating believable objects in a game is important, vital to making games more compelling is creating characters, animal and human, whose behaviour can produce surprises.
If a character in a game always gives a predictable response to certain situations, then I think most people would fairly soon become very bored with that kind of game. So having some kind of inventiveness or unpredictability or creativity on the part of the synthetic characters inside the game is something that could be really, really valuable and make games much more interesting.
Dave Cliff has worked on these problems in university and in the games industry, but believes competitive pressure will give industry the edge on solving them.
In the computer games industry, if you work for one company and you're working on a particular project, it's probably a fair bet that there are other companies, your direct competitors, who are working on similar, if not identical, ideas. And so there's a very big sense of time pressure and of trying to get your system working and working first and making sure that you're fast, that you can deliver it to the market fast and also within budget.
One company pursuing the goal of making characters unpredictable, intelligent and even emotional is Guildford-based games developer Lionhead Studios.
Making games more emotional is really something we're all trying to strive for. It's like the holy grail in the computer games industry. One of the things you have to remember about computer games industry is that we're still very, very young, and we haven't got the skill a lot of the time to fill stories with things called narrative. It's a new word, in fact, in the computer games industry, narrative and story. It's all very well having these simulations, but unless they have, a compulsive story wrapped around them, it's very hard to build up any relationship with them.
Peter started developing characters and stories in his first best-selling games, Theme Park and Dungeon Keeper. But in his new baby, called Black and White, he's taking these ideas much further.
What Black and White is essentially is a story. You play through a story and the story unfolds. But the role that you play in the story is that of a god. As a god in this world, you can do absolutely anything you like. So I can go up and look at little villages and watch the little people get on with their own lives and very much live their own lives, and sort of go down and be very, very intimate with them, look at all the things that they've got and watch them going around, doing their own thing. Or I can sort of pull back and make a sort of a more godly view on the whole world. I can go down and I can have a look at a little person and I can say, well, you know, I'm just not happy with you. I can pick that person up and I can throw them around, just be really nasty to little people. I can pick up rocks and start throwing them at people and just be really, really nasty and cruel and vicious. And what I'm doing in this world is being an evil god. Or I can be wonderfully kind. I can pick up a little person and I can say, you know, if you want some food, you can always go over here and go to this field over here and help these farmers out and just really help these little people out living their lives. So you can be whatever you want to be within the world. Now, as you play through the story, one of the first things that you get to meet is a creature. My creature is an ape. Hello.
The creatures are created by Lionhead Chief Scientist Richard Evans.
The idea is that you're a god doing things in the world, but you also have this agent who tries to perceive what you want and help you out doing it. So he's supposed to be a useful helper. He's also supposed to be psychologically plausible and sweet, capable of making you feel some sort of empathy towards him.
You start to feel empathy towards him because though some of his actions and appearance are programmed in, like this character, his personality isn't. This he learns from you.
What we've done is thought of two ways that you teach your creature. The first way is he watches you play the game. If you're nasty and mean and vicious, he'll be inspired by that. So for example, if I just go down here and pick up a little person and throw that little person around, he'll see that. That's like saying to him, yeah, okay, it's cool to be mean and vicious. Equally, if he sees me being nice, I can sort of pick up a tree and move that tree and place it down near the village just to be nice to the villagers. He'll be inspired by that. That's the first way he learns. The other method that he learns is by telling him off. I can either give him a little clip around the head to say bad, or I can really tell him off by really hitting him and really sort of laying into him, which of course he doesn't like at all, and he's probably going to feel a bit depressed by it. Or you can say that you've been good, and you do that by just stroking him. And the more I stroke him, the more he likes it. I can tickle his feet. And that's just playing with him and saying, yeah, that was pretty good what you did. If you really want to, you can sort of tickle him down there, which perhaps you don't want to do. The first way was really inspired by me looking at young children. And the horrible realization, and it was a horrible realization, that children actually learn all the time. If I'm talking to a child and saying, you know, this is a pen, you can write with it, and look up in your eyes and say pen, and you know that they've learned about a pen. And then I turn back and carry on looking at a football game on TV, and I start swearing because they're not scoring enough goals. Then the realization that the child doesn't stop learning at all. Snap! And that was the sort of inspirational leap about the creature's learning, is that why don't we get the creature to learn all the time?
As the creature learns, his personality changes to either devilish or angelic.
They learn sort of what sort of a guy they want to be, and they learn some sort of idea of what sort of person they want to be, what desires are important in what situations. So, for instance, a creature will start off and he will be frightened at night time. He'll just think, oh no, it's night time, I'm frightened. But over time you can train him that, you don't want him to be frightened at night time. You only want him to be frightened when something scary is approaching him that might damage him.
Something scary, like a kickboxing cow. Although the creature learns, he's born with some behaviour programmed in.
Obviously, at some level, the creature's behaviour has to be programmed. It's not magic. You know, we're writing a computer program. So the basic building blocks of the actions that the creatures perform are pre-programmed. So the creature is taught how to pick up. I explicitly show it how to pick up. So the little building blocks of actions that the creature does are pre-programmed into the game. But then the way in which they sequence them together and how they decide what to do in a particular situation is determined by the creature's own mind and his own mental states.
I can perform 36 separate and distinct acts.
This technology is called artificial intelligence, or AI. Philosophers and computer scientists have long hoped that it would one day be possible to make computers and robots as intelligent as humans. And they've managed to create computers that are brilliant at specific things, like beating a grandmaster at chess.
For a lot of its history, artificial intelligence concentrated on trying to get computers to do the kind of things that a human needs a degree-level training in order to do. So typical examples were translating from one language to another, say from English to French, or diagnosing bacterial blood diseases from patient symptoms, and all kind of things that if you saw a human doing it, you'd say, gosh, that person must have gone to college. But it turns out that an awful lot of the intelligence you need in computer games isn't that kind of degree-level intelligence. It's more like common sense.
In computer games, it's not really that you're trying to make them clever or good at sums. It's more that you're trying to make them plausible. So in a way, it's more like artificial stupidity.
Which is just as well, as most computers are incapable of thinking through things that even the youngest child can do, like putting on a sweater. So Peter and his team had to start developing the model for the creature from scratch.
We've got some very, very bright people here, and it soon became very apparent that there were no techniques that allowed us to make this model, because this model could learn in a very unique way, learn by experience and rewarding. We had to build a whole new model.
One technique mimics the way our brains work. As we learn, the connections between cells inside our brains are reinforced, creating pathways known as neural pathways. As the creature learns, pathways are created from strings of computer code.
What happens in situations where you want to repeat the same behaviour is the connection strengths are reinforced, they grow, and stronger connections are made. And where you want similar occasions not to be the result of similar behaviours, then you delete those connections or you reduce their strength. It's so-called neural network learning. And it does draw some inspiration from what's understood of real neurons in real brains in real animals.
But to make computers as clever as a naughty boy, they'd need to know everything we know about the world, an impossible task. So Lionhead is working on systems that learn what they need to know about the limited environment in which they exist.
The reason why I can say our creatures are as intelligent as any artificial intelligence that you see anywhere is that essentially we cheat. And the way that we cheat is that the creature is caught within our world. And we have described this world to him. So when he walks over to a tree, he knows it's a tree. He knows it's made of wood. He knows it burns. He knows all sorts of things about it. It's not like the real world.
There were some early problems with the technology.
The first time the creature was let loose in the world, quite a lot of things went wrong, to be honest with you, which I think is inevitable. To start with, he just stood there looking down at his feet, and I thought, well, why is he doing that? He should be going off doing something slightly more exciting than that. But then I debugged the code a bit, and it turned out he was trying to eat himself. He was hungry as soon as he was born, and he didn't realise that eating himself was just totally impossible, and so he tried to eat himself. So that was not very impressive.
Once you have this simulation of a human being, of the emotional content, and not only of human beings, of animals, of a world, if you like, then the permutations that start coming through are fascinating in themselves.
Time to show you what you really can do with rocks. I want you to pick that up, and I want you to throw it at those little people.
Though Peter knows the design of the creature intimately, it still surprises him.
The ape and me have given many demonstrations to many people, and he always overshadows me.
He dances well, but is he actually alive? Somewhere on the continuum of life between a rock and a human.
I think it's actually a very difficult question to answer as to whether they're alive or not. And I suspect that if you got 100 biologists or 100 artificial life scientists in a room and asked them that question, they wouldn't all agree. I think some people would think that they probably could be classed as alive, but others would say definitely not.
But as the computer power available to ordinary consumers doubles every 18 months, who knows what's possible with this kind of technology in computer games in the future?
There has not been a single moment for the computer games industry to ever catch its breath, to ever say, right, we're on a level playing field now. There's always new hardware, new innovations, new software techniques, new tools to consider. And also, we're constantly pushing the barriers. We're constantly flying the envelope. And constantly doing that means that we constantly have to innovate. The heartbreaking though it is, you have to archive all of your stuff, stick it on the shelf and say, that's what I thought was the greatest thing in the world then, and this is going to be the greatest thing in the world tomorrow.